So a lot of what we've covered so far in a lot of our talks has been around digital forensics and incident response, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more from a preparation standpoint with a couple demos and do like a little scenario walkthrough. It'll be a little bit different than maybe what you've seen so far. This is a combination of a couple of different presentations. So my name is Dennis Allen. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Program Strategy and Risk at a new company called Stratascale. They are a subsidiary of SHI, if you've heard of them. They've been in the news lately. There's certain, sort of timely, if you will, that I'm here. So I won't, we'll leave that one alone for now. But I've been in information technology and security for close to 30 years. Spent about 15 of those with my friend Chris May at the Software Engineering Institute, where we did a lot of DoD cyber workforce development programs for cyber protection teams and the federal government. A lot of things around defense in-depth strategies, digital forensics, all that fun stuff. And at Stratascale, we do a lot of, we have a ransomware readiness service. So we do a lot of tabletop exercises, just an evaluation of your cybersecurity program, maturity, making sure you're prepared to do everything you need to do to prevent, detect, respond to a ransomware event. So I'm going to breeze through the ransomware landscape stuff because we're beating that one to death. Talk a little bit about preparation, a couple bullet points of things that are important for preparing for a ransomware type of event, or hopefully preventing it as well. We're going to do a scenario walkthrough. So I got a couple short videos. I'll kind of pull through and talk through some events and kind of do an investigation, if you will. And then we'll just wrap up with some questions if you have any. So there's lots of cool things out there. I think Alan was talking about his stats from Recorded Future. So it's all the different lens that you're looking through these things, where your data is coming from. There's lots of cool things out there. This one here is one that we discovered not too long ago. A friend of mine sent me the link to Black Fog. Has anybody ever heard of them? It's a pretty cool website. They keep this pretty up to date. Every month they're updating this. It's I'm not going to beat it up, but if you look here at the 2021 stats, any guesses to why there might have been a fall off in ransomware around November 2021? Maybe the REvil takedown, that type of thing, right? So that's kind of interesting to see if there's any parallels to drop-offs, and then all of a sudden they come back and you get Conti and things like that. So I looked at these stats last month in July, and I'm like, oh, maybe ransomware is going away. And then all of a sudden August got a little crazy, right? So it's kind of fun. But a couple of the trends here, PowerShell, we've heard that one, foot stomp that over and over again. I mentioned Chris already. He's saying to me, why don't people just disable PowerShell? Why don't they just disable PowerShell? That's a good answer, right? Or a good question. I think larger organizations might be leveraging it for some automation and things like that, but there might be ways to do some application whitelisting or restrict permissions on that. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But this is really interesting. I like the pictures here because think about the targets. Right? You still got, the US is still the biggest target, and if you look at where most of this data is being exfiltrated according to these stats, the two biggest places would be Russia and China. Maybe whether, I don't know if you hear much about China from the ransomware perspective, but this is, I thought that was interesting, right? Because we hear all this North Korea stuff, and we hear Russia, and you see Ukraine on there as well. I thought the China one kind of stood out. But we've also heard already today about, the uptick in education and government targeting, et cetera. So won't beat that up. So just general best practices, and this comes off of a bunch of different research articles that I've gone through, just trying to put a couple of things together, right? Just at a high level, you need to prepare your organization. And that means having an incident response plan put together. What is your risk strategy? What is the important information, important data within your organization? A lot of places haven't got that properly defined, believe it or not. So they go out and they buy a tool and they implement it, but it's not necessarily protecting the right data, the right systems. You have that super duper Cohesity or Rubrik or Veeam, and you're backing up your solutions. You don't need to back up that Word document that hasn't changed in 3 years. You don't need 30-minute snapshots on that, right? So you got to figure out what's important to your organization and adjust fire accordingly. We talked a little bit about insurance earlier in some of the other discussions. What insurance policies do you have? Do you have anything that's protecting you from social engineering? Do you have something just from computer fraud, that is a cybersecurity hacking thing, versus some sort of financial policy or physical damage that might occur? Is that going to cover damage to a server, or is it your cyber policy, right? There's different things you have to consider here. They kind of all go together. And then obviously you need to instrument that environment with the right controls, both procedural and technical controls. We'll see some of those here in a bit. You have to know what you need from a business in terms of what's that RTO, that restore time objective, or your restore point objective. Defining those up front and making sure your things are in place to actually execute that, and you test that through tabletop exercises or attack simulations. These are all things that are going to prepare you for success in a ransomware type of attack, or any type of attack for that matter. And then obviously it's a continuous cycle of improvement, right? You're going to test that and then improve things along the way. So I touched upon some of these already. You have to have this incident response playbook defined for, again, what is important in your organization, how are you protecting it. You have to do all the basics from security awareness training to having technical controls, your network segmentation, your multi-factor authentication. Hopefully these are all very familiar to the people in this room, right? We don't need to beat these up too much, but if you do the basics of cybersecurity, your patch management, your vulnerability management, you have the right tools in place, they're going to be pretty effective at stopping any kind of attack in addition to a ransomware specific one. We've seen this a little bit. This is the mapping to the MITRE attack framework. I like this one. This is by Scythe. Okay, it sounded like a duck. It was nice. This is from Scythe.io. They do some penetration testing and those types of tests, vulnerability assessments, but they did a pretty neat mapping. They've got tools that go along with their service offering, but they have taken and mapped like the top 10 ransomware TTPs, the tools, tactics, and procedures, and they figured out where some of the most common ones are, right? So you can go through this and you can see that, you know, a lot of things might apply, but their top ones here for the first piece for execution, command and scripting interpreter, right? That goes right along with PowerShell, right? What they've done is they color code it. So the red are the most popular, the most common. So when they take all of these ransomware variants, what they've said is, hey, there's a couple things that they're going to do. And it's tough to read this. They'll be in the slides for downloads, and I've got the link to it there as well. But there's certain things in here that are important. PowerShell, if we jump to privilege escalation, they're doing things with scheduled jobs and tasks. So you need to be monitoring those scheduled jobs on machines. If you look at some of the most popular things for command and control, they're talking about how they're using HTTPS to try to obfuscate that command and control and get out to sites, and what they're doing for the collection, how they're doing archiving those things, whether they're tarring them up or zipping them, or how they're encrypting them and things like that. So they've identified not just TTPs that map to ransomware, they've kind of looked at the top 10 ransomware variants and highlighted the most popular ones. What this does for you is it gives you a clue. Let's focus on this. If I focus on just restricting PowerShell access, that's the most common way these things are being executed. I can stop a lot of this right there, right? Those types of things. So if you have to prioritize your defenses, you can leverage something like that. All right, so I'm going to get into a little bit of a scenario. This is something that we put together a while back. It's a reference architecture for a financial institution. It has a transaction server, has a bunch of monitoring tools. You don't need to worry a whole lot about it. I'll walk you through it, but hey, it's doing a lot of things well. A lot of network segmentation for users. They're doing syslog. They're doing things with Splunk in there. They've got backup servers. They got email, etc. So we're going to walk through a little scenario here of, user calls, says they accidentally clicked on a link and then something bad happened. Well, let's see what that something looks like. Looks like they had some stuff that was encrypted, right? So now that's usually your first indication. There might be other indicators, especially with ransomware. You might see things like high disk utilization, right, when files are being changed or encrypted, or you might see indicators from network traffic, bandwidth spikes if data is being exfiltrated before the encryption occurs. There's other indicators, but in this particular case, somebody did something that they shouldn't have been done. They clicked on a link. It did some bad stuff. And what you'll see here as we go through these next slides in the demo and some of the tools is you might see some things you recognize, you might see some things you don't. It's important to understand it's the pilot, right? It's the pilot, not the plane. Right? This is a Chuck Yeager quote that was paraphrased by Maverick and Top Gun recently, right? So understand that there are lots of really cool tools out there, and they'll do pretty much, there's a lot of redundancy, right? There isn't necessarily, maybe there's a best in breed, but that doesn't mean that tool 2 through 10 stinks, right? So it becomes exercise of mastering your own capabilities and what you can do with that tool to get the most information out of it. All right, so let's take a look at our demo here, our first piece of the demo. So we're going to do a little search on a string. Let's say, again, our user said they clicked on a link, had something to do, they said with SANS, they're not sure. So our first tool might just be going into Exchange and going through our Exchange administration tools to go ahead and query for any emails that might have come through with that subject line or some other information that's in there. We select a date range and we come up with some results. So when we look at the results, let's just say in this example here we have it was only delivered to 8 folks. So that helps. We know one of those people that got it, but who are the other folks that got it? And so whether you're using Mimecast or some other mail tool, again, just take advantage of the tools that are available for the systems that you have to begin the investigation. So we see that it was delivered to 8 folks. We can see who sent it, or at least the from address and what they're reporting to be. We got a Linda Carter there. If we know what SANS is, we know SANS is a sans.edu versus or sans.org. I mean, we're not really sure what this is. Maybe we do a little homework to figure out what the actual domain is for this organization to see if it's real. When you look in here, you can see that the link actually, instead of going to the URL that's displayed, goes to some weird IP address. So we can make a note of 46.236, whatever that is. And next thing you want to do is we're going to hop over to our web proxy. So we want to see, we know that obviously this is a link to a URL. We've instrumented our organization with some sort of web proxying capability. We want to see who actually went to either this malicious URL by domain name, or in this case, by IP address. Oh. Jump ahead. All right, so we can come in this case, it's using Blue Coat Reporter, but again, remember, it's the pilot, not the plane. Don't you could be using something else. Use Squid Proxy or Cash Flow if you want to go back 20 years, whatever. I can't see without, I got to get my glasses. Hang on. This is my first presentation with my readers, so don't hold that against me. All right, so we do a search on that IP address, and it might be a little small, but just understand where I'm going here. So the idea is we're going to search for that IP address. We're going to come through our reporting options here, put in that bad guy IP, and then the next piece is we want to see how many people clicked on it. In this case, we're lucky. We only have one person that clicked on it, so that's a good thing. Oh, man. My cursor keeps disappearing on me up here. All right, so we see that our IP address of our user, 172.16.80. And now let's see what other things that workstation is connecting to, because that's really a big thing here. Let's take that over now to our firewall, and we search for that. And in this case, it's a Palo Alto firewall. And we see that now, not only was this user connecting to this bad guy IP, right? We figured out what their IP address is. We take it to the next level, and let's go over to the firewall and see, hey, what else is this user doing? Is there something else that this, we'll call it the attacker, somehow gained access to this machine, and maybe they're doing something else, they're trying to pivot, go wherever, right? So if we go over to the firewall, we can see that there's this other connection out here to the same IP address, but on a different port. So TCP 25 is typically mail, but in this case, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But now we know just a couple of things. We can look up this IP address. We say, hey, that's someplace in Finland. It's not a known bad one, so maybe we're not blocking that with our known bad IP attribution list, something like that. Yeah, go ahead. Good question. Good question. So a good defense in depth strategy would be to restrict TCP 25, which is typically SMTP, to only allowing the mail server to do it, right? So only your Exchange server or whatever you're using to be the one that's connecting outbound, and not necessarily having that open to everybody. So again, that's a good point. It shouldn't, but depending on the configuration of the firewall and the environment, it may. Like a lot of organizations do still allow outbound ports, right? Whatever they might be, versus restricting them to only. DNS should only be coming from the DNS server. Mail should only be coming from the mail server, right? Web traffic should only be coming from the web proxy server. That's not always the case, right? They don't always have those restrictions in place. So in our incident so far, we know that we have an email that was sent from Linda Carter at sans.edu instead of .org, which is probably what it is. Somebody clicked on that malicious link. It went to this IP address. 8 users received it. 1 we confirmed, visited that phishing site, and we see that that one person that connected or hit that external link is also now connected outbound on a different port. And we also know that this IP address is not necessarily a known bad one so far. So let's take it to the next level and see what we have. Let's switch the search here now, and instead of looking at what our internal user is connecting to, let's search for that bad guy IP, because worst case scenario, somebody else is now connected to that bad guy IP. We don't necessarily know all of what happened to make that happen, but let's just see if anybody else is connected to him. And we got a couple other workstations or whatever are. So we're just kind of going through our hunt process here. You need to have something that's going to help you facilitate this. And you can see it's also on a couple of different ports. So port 80, which would typically be web. We've got some outbound access on that. We've got some outbound access on port 443 again. It should be only our web proxy doing these types of things, not different user machines. But it's definitely something we want to take a closer look at. But if we go back to our network here, we see that we have another firewall. So we pop over to that other firewall and do the same thing. We now know we have a bad guy IP address. It's being accessed by some user machines. We're going to go to our other firewall and see if we have that bad guy IP address having any kind of connectivity. In this case, we have a transaction server that's reaching out to the bad guy. So let's take a look at our transaction server and see what's going on. Hopefully everything's okay. Oh, something's not right. Right, so now our critical transaction server is rebooting on us as soon as we logged in. That can't be good. We can go take a look at some other monitoring tools in our environment. In this case, there's a Nagios server, or Nagios, depending on how you want to pronounce it. We go Nagios. You can see there's a couple problems here. One, it tells you, again, that the server is not working. So having monitoring tools like this in place is critical because you need to be able to identify these anomalies. It might not be as obvious as a service is unavailable. It might be something like utilization. So that's where SNMP statistics are really helpful. When you look at either bandwidth utilization or CPU utilization or disk utilization, any spikes or anomalies in those could be an indicator that something's going on that maybe shouldn't be, whether it's performance related or bad guy related. So biggest concern. No, biggest concern right now, you're in an incident, you know somebody clicked on a link, stuff's encrypted, you know you went to the transaction server, it's rebooting. What would your biggest concern be? You don't know what data's out, right? Lateral movement, you're right. There's a lot of things it could be. And here's where you got to take a step back. What is your next action? Do I care about this user's machine and their files being encrypted? Well, we'd have to take a closer look. Is it also a file share that has some important documents or critical information that was encrypted that we can't access? Or what's this transaction server doing? If it's not available for doing credit card processing, there's a whole lot of other business things that are down, right? So that's one of the things that we try to do in our tabletop exercises, or what you need to do when you do tabletop exercises. You plan, a lot of times folks plan for one event to happen, but they don't necessarily plan on having to prioritize their actions when multiple things happen. You got a hurricane coming at the same time you got a ransomware event. You got to offload these cargo ships immediately so that you can protect that cargo and for the safety of everybody that's working. But oh, by the way, you can't because the machines that you need to process and offload the cargo are unavailable, right? So there's different things you got to manage with that. All right, we only got we got 10 minutes. We're good. All right. So we know a few more things now, that we have internal hosts are connected to the bad guy, multiple ones now. We also know that our transaction server it's got an issue and that it's also connecting out to the bad guy. We also know it automatically reboots. So now that's an issue. How are we going to do our collection or do forensics analysis on that when we can't log into it locally? Hopefully we've got some EDR, XDR tools that we can access some services remotely to do that collection. And we've got some network monitoring tools that demonstrate some other issues there. So have we identified the root cause? Not really, maybe. You know, we know at least one thing happened. We know at least this one individual is infected by ransomware, but we got to kind of do some timeline analysis and see when it all kind of started and see what else is going on. We don't necessarily know the full extent of the incident yet. We have to start discussing, you know, this would maybe be an IT-related thing. IT or help desk got the call. Now they realize there's something wrong. Now it's an incident. Do we have an incident response team? Is it a formal organization security team, or is it a team that we have to assemble, right? We don't know the full extent yet, but we know we need to escalate this and actually declare an incident. And then we know the next piece of analysis would probably be forensics on the transaction server at a minimum. Maybe the user's workstation to see, you know, as we saw in the examples, where's Joseph? That Joseph provided in terms of going through and maybe looking, is it a link file, whatever it might be, how did it actually get in there? And do you need third parties? Do you have a managed desktop response team or service that needs to be engaged? Are you ready to call cyber insurance yet or something like that? You don't know. Do you have a forensics team on standby? This is where the incident response book comes in, response plans come into play. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that are available to you for free if you don't know organizations that have an incident response plan. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency has put out some guidelines, and here's sort of a sample incident vulnerability response playbooks. So there's a link in the slides. I wanted just to point to some resources that you might be able to leverage. They have things like this playbook in here. They have sort of a workflow, a flow chart, if you will, of what to do in terms of managing an incident, and it's a good guideline. It's a good sample. It's going to be different for each organization, but it's a good sample to go by if you know an organization that doesn't have anything. And then you get into some of the specifics of the plan there, and it's key questions that you need to answer. You know, what was the initial attack vector? How did they access the environment? Are they still in the environment? All that fun stuff. And then again, it maps it to some of those techniques. So good, again, a good resource for you to check out if you haven't been there. Did you see that, or was it, you might not have been seeing it? I got to get out of the zone here. All right, so the last piece that I was talking about, I'll just highlight here. Within here, again, there's key questions that you would ask. I'm used to Chris looking at me when I'm presenting, so when he gave me the, what are you talking about? Look, I realized it's probably not on the screen. Here's the flowchart piece I was mentioning that they have in there for a sample. And yeah, so definitely check that out. Again, there's a link to it right here on the slide deck. We talked about some of these already. Oh, yeah, so there is actually one piece I wanted to mention here. That ransomware, you probably couldn't see the screen, but it's asking for 5 Bitcoin. So one of the things to understand is how much is 5 Bitcoin? Anybody want to Google that real quick? Right, and the thing is, because that might impact your decision. Maybe I could just pay that 5 Bitcoin, forget the OFAC stuff or whatever might be in there. But maybe it's cheap enough for me to just pay the ransom to get back online, right? Or maybe it's cost prohibitive for me to do that. So those are something to be concerned. That's something to consider. All right. So let's put the DF in DFIR, so digital forensics, into our incident response plan. Has everybody heard of cyber triage? I know we're at a basis conference, I'm pretty sure, right? It's pretty cool. So if you haven't played with it and you've done any kind of forensics in the past, especially that live collection, we used to teach this stuff for years, and the idea would be to make sure you know your tools, have your scripts ready, have all your tools assembled, have as many static tools as you can that don't rely on anything. You put in your read-only media, and you do all this fun stuff. Man, this is pretty cool. So when I first saw this, I started playing with it. It's going to do probably 90% of the stuff that we were looking to actually put together a collection of tools to do. And oh, by the way, all of that weird stuff, let's pipe it over Netcat and let's do that. Nope, you don't have to worry about that. It's kind of handling that for you. So again, not trying to sell anything in particular. This solves a problem that we had years ago when we were talking about assembling some of these things. So it's pretty neat for doing that collection, both locally or sending it over to the server, if you will, the cyber triage server. And then it does some of the analysis for you, and that's the hard part. Collection is one thing. That's the whole idea of going beyond your SIM, which is doing all your log collection and aggregation, to getting into an XDR or some sort of SOAR, where it's going to try to do that analysis and provide recommendations of what you should do. So pretty cool tool. I just wanted to put a shout out there to the Basis team and to Cyber Triage. Kind of dig it. And what that tool's looking for, as well as other tools, are things like this. Have there been domain admins added? Has there been local admins added? Are there weirdness going on? Is there weirdness going on with scheduled tasks? We see that all the time. And some of it's normal, but it's weird, so it gets triggered, and then you get to decide whether or not that's actually bad activity or suspicious activity, or you can mark it as good, that type of thing. There's other things here. The reason I have this highlighted is because I wanted to, let me get out of here. I wanted to just point out, if I could find my mouse. There we go. This site here, if you're not familiar with this, the NSA's Central Security Service, they used to have, NSA's been putting out cybersecurity guidance for a long time. If you've been around almost, we'll say 20 plus. Once you get over 20, you just say 20 plus. If you've been here around 20 plus years, you're probably familiar with some of the guidance they put out for your Windows NT4 security templates and such. But there's a whole bunch of things on here, and we've been talking about PowerShell a whole lot. In here is, I might have scrolled over it, keeping PowerShell security measures to use and embrace, whatever, that doesn't even make sense to me. But anyway, you click on this, you've got a whole bunch of things in here for, we talked about deep script block logging already, right? So there's a bunch of things in terms of protecting PowerShell and things that you can use in guidance. So this is just another good resource for helping you prepare for an event. Prepare your environment to mitigate that risk and try to prevent bad things from happening. All right, let me pop back to the slides because we only got a little bit left. All right, so our endpoint detection and response tools are giving way to extended detection and response tools, things that could do a little bit more, correlate work from a bunch of evidence from a number of tools. Here's just an example of something from SentinelOne and from CrowdStrike. Again, not saying one's better than the other, really presenting these over anything else. It's just the idea of we're going to take that sort of collection that we just saw with cyber triage and kind of blow that up a little bit to be able to have sort of these enterprise class types of applications that we have an agent based versus like in cyber triage you don't necessarily need to have an agent to do that collection, whereas you can have these sort of agent based things. There's use cases for each. These agents-based things throughout your enterprise to do sort of this continuous collection, continuous monitoring, continuous correlation, and it gives you an idea not just of activity, but specific threats. It's going to do that sort of an analysis to say, hey, some unauthorized PowerShell script was executed, or there might be some additional activity like your Chrome. Your Chrome database was encrypted. That's something that Cyber Triage will tell you on the collection. Some of these might be able to tell you that on the fly type of thing. So just another example from an XDR perspective. You got a couple actions that you can take here once you find out that there is something that has happened to that machine. You can, again, reboot that machine, uninstall some software, install some software, do that collection. You have some other things that you can have in place ahead of time. If you see the example up there in the top right-hand corner that SentinelOne provides in terms of automatically either detecting or also preventing certain threats or suspicious activity from executing. So kind of cool. And then you get to your managed extended detect and response things, which basically means have somebody else do it for you, right? So depending on the size of your organization, this is a cool screenshot from Expel. Pretty cool organization, but if you look at it, just the idea here is to have something that is going to provide those findings, those recommendations for remediation. It's going to do all that correlation and put together that timeline for you. So you're going to get some of these out of your XDR tools and EDR tools to some extent, but here you've got the added advantage of putting an analyst in the chair to make sure everything makes sense and it does everything that needs to be. So just wanted to show you the evolution. So the idea here that we've talked about, the things that we talked about, we talked a lot about ransomware and all the stuff that happens within PowerShell and the examples of the malicious links and all that fun stuff. But good defense in depth strategy helps you for ransomware or any other type of cyber attack. So that means having the tools in place to monitor that network connectivity, to monitor your server and your workstation utilization for anomalies and processor utilization or memory utilization or disk utilization, all that fun stuff. Monitoring that web traffic, whether you're blocking known bad IP addresses or domain names, that becomes important, right? And being able to react quickly when you see some bad activity to then either automatically shut that down or at least give you an alert so that you can take that action. So the one thing that I'll add, because I know we're out of time, is what I've got capitalized down here, communications plan. This is often overlooked when you're putting together an incident response plan or trying to figure out what you're going to do with ransomware. How are you going to talk to your people, right? How are you going to notify your people? Or do you have an alert system where they're going to get an SMS or a backup email so they send it to their home email if your email system's down? How are you going to communicate with your customers or your partners when they start asking, hey, are you guys up and running? Right? What's going on? Are you hacked? Is my data safe? Is the customer data safe? Right? You need to have a communication strategy. And again, that goes back to the, what your legal counsel will allow you to say with the customers and partners, et cetera. So, but just, it's an important piece. I want to foot stomp that because a lot of people overlook that. How are you going to communicate with your people? What are your alternative solutions for getting them messages and getting information out to them? When do they get the all clear? How are you going to do the same with your customers? A lot of times that is overlooked. That's it. That's my LinkedIn profile. Hit me up if you got questions or you want to connect. We're about out of time, but any questions real quick? Yes, no? The question is, do I recommend any software? No, all of that, right? So here's the thing. I work for basically a VAR, so we sell everything, right? So I can't really say I recommend one thing or another. I go back to that one picture I had, right? It's the pilot, not the plane. A lot of these tools overlap. They have similar capabilities. The question is, I said your objective should be to master whatever you have. Right? And if you do get one thing, master that. Go to that training, become an expert in it, figure out how you could do more than that than is currently documented. That's the magic there, because it's going to come down to your skill as an administrator or incident handler, incident responder to get the most out of that tool, understand what it means, how to collect all that data safely, securely, and analyze it. That would probably be my biggest recommendation. Don't sweat you want to do a functional comparison to what you need, features, and all that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, master whatever you do have in your environment. No. Short answer, do I think a SIEM or SIEM will do what an XDR, MDR does? No. What a SIEM is intended for is to do that log collection, aggregation, help with maybe that search and hunt capability. But what you're getting out of an XDR solution is the ability to do that automatic analysis and tell you, here's the threats I see, here's the action items in your environment, versus having this big collection of stuff that you can maybe tune some alerts and you can use that for your sort of, we'll call it your evidence repository when you're trying to figure out what's broken or what happened. Right. Anybody else? All right. Thank you.